The lead surgeon at St. Jude's didn't even look at the chart anymore. He just looked at the clock. Ángel Gabriel, the man whose name used to make the city's concrete tremble, was now just a collection of fading rhythms on a monitor. 6 months ago, he ruled the docks with an iron fist and a silver tongue. Today, he was a vegetable in a sterile suite, his tattooed skin pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. The bullets that caught him outside Il Posto hadn't just pierced his lungs, they had punctured his empire. With no brain activity recorded in weeks, the board of directors had made the final call. In 48 hours, the machines would be silenced forever. Outside his door, the wolves in expensive suits were already dividing his life's work. His brother Diego was counting the cash, his rivals were counting the days. No one came to room 402 out of love, except for one person who wasn't even supposed to be there. Zainab, a 4-year-old refugee with a messy bun and a hospital gown of her own, didn't know about the blood on Angel's hands. To her, he wasn't the devil of the docks. He was just the sleeping giant who looked like he was having a bad dream. While the nurses stepped back to let nature take its course, Zainab stepped forward, leaning her small weight against his silent heart to whisper the one thing the world had forgotten to tell him: "Wake up." The air in the private wing of St. Jude's was thick with the smell of bleach and the heavy silence of waiting. Outside room 402, the world was on fire. Ángel Gabriel had been the glue holding the city's docks together, and now that the glue was drying up, everything was falling apart. His lieutenant, Marco, paced the hallway like a caged tiger. Marco was a man of silver hair and sharp suits, but his eyes were bloodshot. Every 10 minutes, his phone buzzed with news of a hijacked shipment or a warehouse set ablaze. He looked through the glass at Angel's still body and cursed under his breath. He didn't miss a friend, he missed his protection. In the corner sat Diego, Angel's younger brother. Diego wasn't pacing, he was leaning against the wall, scrolling through a digital ledger on his tablet, calculating the value of the properties that would officially become his the moment the heart monitor turned into a flat line. To Diego, the 48-hour countdown wasn't a tragedy, it was a deadline for a promotion. The most dangerous visitor, however, didn't stay long. Vincent Torino, Angel's longest rival, walked past the room with a slow, shark-like grin. He didn't enter, he simply tapped on the glass with a heavy gold ring, a sound like a coffin nail being driven home, and kept walking. He didn't need to say a word. The lion of the docks was a ghost, and Torino was already moving into the den. But when the suits cleared out and the visiting hours ended, the heavy footsteps were replaced by something much lighter. Zainab moved through the shadows of the hallway with the practiced skill of a little girl who spent too much time in hospitals. Her own room in the pediatric ward was bright and filled with stuffed animals, but it felt lonely. To her, the scary man in 402 wasn't a boss or a monster. She pushed the door open just a crack, the wheels of her IV pole squeaking softly. She hopped onto the chair beside his bed, her small, pale hand reaching out to touch one of the dark tattoos on his forearm. She traced the ink of a soaring eagle, her fingers light as a feather. "You look sad today, Mr. Sleeping Man," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the hum of the ventilator. Zainab didn't see the machines, or the end-of-life notices taped to the clipboard at the foot of the bed. She only saw a man who looked like he was trapped in a very long, very dark tunnel. She told him about her favorite nurse who gave her extra lime gelatin, and how her mom cried in the bathroom when she thought Zainab wasn't looking. "My mom says angels watch over us," she said, leaning closer until her curls brushed his shoulder. "But you're an angel too. That's what the paper says. So you can't leave yet. I don't have anyone else to talk to who listens this good." In the hallway, the clock on the wall clicked forward. 47 hours left. Inside the room, Zainab stayed,
a tiny point of light in a room full of shadows, unaware that the angels the world was counting down were about to face a very different kind of judgment. The moonlight filtered through the hospital blinds, casting long stripes across the floor like the bars of a cage. As Zainab sat by Angel's bed, she didn't just see a patient, she saw a partner in silence. Zainab knew a lot about silence. It was the same silence that had filled her home in Syria after the loud noises of the war finally stopped. 4 years ago, Zainab had been a baby when the bombs took her parents and her home. She had traveled across the sea with nothing but a small stuffed rabbit and a cough that wouldn't go away. When she arrived in the city, the doctors found out the cough wasn't from the cold sea air, it was leukemia. Her life became a series of white walls, sharp needles, and the constant hum of machines. But even as her hair thinned and her legs grew tired, Zainab never complained. She had survived a war. She wasn't afraid of a hospital. Deep inside his coma, Ángel Gabriel was trapped in a different kind of war. His mind was stuck in a loop, playing the same memory from 30 years ago. He was 12 years old again, standing in a rainy alleyway in Brooklyn. He could still feel the cold water soaking through his shirt and a smell of wet pavement. In that memory, he was watching his father, the only person he ever loved, get pushed to his knees by men in dark coats. He remembered the flash of light and the way the world went quiet afterward. That was the day the young, soft-hearted Ángel died, and the devil of the docks was born. He had spent the rest of his life building walls of steel and anger so that no one could ever hurt him again. He thought that if he became the scariest man in the city, he would finally be safe. But now, those walls were crumbling in the gray fog of his mind. He was drifting away, ready to let go, until a new sound started to pierce through the memory of the rain. It wasn't the sound of a gunshot or a shout. It was the soft, rhythmic tapping of a child's finger on his arm. Zainab leaned her head against the side of his mattress. "I lost my papa too," she whispered into the dark. "But I try to be brave. If I'm brave, maybe the monsters won't find me." She reached into the pocket of her pink dress and pulled out a small, smooth stone she had found in the hospital garden. She tucked it into Angel's limp, tattooed palm. "This is a lucky stone," she said softly. "It helped me when the big medicine made me feel sick. You hold it. You have to be brave too, Mr. Ángel. The doctors say you're going away, but I think you're just hiding. You don't have to hide from me." In that moment, the heart monitor skipped a single beat. For the first time in weeks, the devil wasn't alone in the dark. A little girl who had lost everything was offering him the only thing she had left, a reason to stay.
The deadline had arrived like a cold winter fog. At the nurses' station, the atmosphere was heavy. The lead doctor checked his watch and nodded to the staff. The legal papers were signed, the wolves in the hallway had stopped pretending to care, and the order was final. In less than an hour, the power to Angel's machines would be cut. The man who had once controlled the city's fate was now entirely out of time. But a different kind of crisis was unfolding just a few doors down. In the pediatric ward, Zainab's monitor began to chime a high, frantic warning. The leukemia was aggressive, and tonight her small body was losing the fight. Her fever had spiked so high that the world around her became a blur of spinning lights and muffled voices. Her mother was at the pharmacy downstairs, desperately trying to settle the bill for the next round of treatment, leaving the room momentarily empty. Zainab didn't want to stay in her bed. In her fever dream, she felt a strange pull, a need to find the only person who seemed as lonely as she was. Shakily, she unhooked her IV pole. With trembling legs, she shuffled down the hallway, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Every step felt like walking through deep water, but she kept moving until she reached room 402.
The room was dark. The nurses had already stepped back, giving the family a few last moments of privacy that no one was using. Zainab stumbled toward the bed. She was so weak that she couldn't sit in the chair anymore. With the last of her strength, she crawled onto the edge of the mattress and pulled herself onto Angel's chest. The contrast was startling. His chest was broad and scarred, as cold as marble, while her small frame was burning with a terrifying heat. She pressed her ear against his silent heart, her tears soaking into his thin hospital gown. "Mr. Angel," she sobbed, her voice breaking into a tiny, desperate whisper. "The doctors are coming to turn off the lights. They say you have to go, and they say I'm too sick to stay, but I'm scared of the dark." She gripped his gown with her small, weak fingers, her forehead resting against his jaw. "Please, I don't want to be alone. If you're an angel, you have to help me. Wake up, please, just wake up." As she spoke, her strength finally gave out. Her eyes fluttered shut and she went limp against him, her feverish heart beating wildly against his motionless one. Outside in the hall, a nurse's hand reached for the door handle to begin the final procedure. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, and then, in the deepest part of the shadows, a tattooed finger suddenly flickered.
The gray fog inside Angel's mind had been thick for weeks, but the heat from Zainab's fever was like a torch cutting through the mist. For the first time, the rainy alleyway of his memory faded away. He no longer felt the cold pavement of his childhood. Instead, he felt a weight on his chest, a heavy, burning warmth that demanded he come back to the surface. With a gasp that sounded like a rusted gate opening, Angel's lungs pulled in air. His eyes snapped open. At first, everything was a blur of harsh white light and the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the monitor, which was now racing. He felt a sharp pain in his side, but more than that, he felt something small and soft pressing against his heart. He looked down, his neck stiff and weak, and saw a mop of curly hair and a dusty pink dress. "Zainab?" he croaked. His voice was scratchy, like it was full of sand. The little girl stirred, her eyes fluttered open, still glassy with fever. When she saw his dark eyes looking back at her, a weak but radiant smile spread across her face. She didn't scream or run for a nurse. She simply reached up and patted his stubbled cheek with a shaky hand. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and relief. "I knew you were just hiding." Angel tried to sit up, but his muscles felt like lead. What happened? Where is Marco? Where is my brother?" Zainab shook her head slowly. "They went away. They were waiting for the lights to go out. But I told you to wake up. I prayed really hard, and I gave you my lucky stone. I told the angels you weren't finished yet." Angel's hand brushed against the small, smooth stone she had tucked into his palm earlier. He looked at the tiny girl, confused. He was a man who had lived a life of violence, a man who had been declared dead by the best doctors in the state. Yet here was this child, claiming she had called him back from the edge. "Why?" he asked, his heart heavy with a feeling he couldn't name. "Why would you help a man like me?" "Because you looked lonely," she said simply. Then her small body drifted into a fit of coughing that left her breathless and pale. She slumped back against him, her skin feeling even hotter than before. "You're sick," Angel realized, his instincts as a protector suddenly surging through his weak frame. He noticed the yellow, high-risk wristband on her arm and the way her breathing whistled in her chest. "Where are the doctors? Why are you here with me instead of in your own bed?" "The medicine doesn't work anymore," Zainab murmured, her eyes closing again. "Mom says it's too expensive, and the doctors say my blood is tired. But it's okay now. You're awake. You're the big Angel. You can fix it, right?" Ángel Gabriel looked at the ceiling, his jaw tightening. He had spent years using his power to break things.
Now, looking at the fragile girl who had literally breathed life back into his soul, he felt a shock of terror greater than any bullet. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to be a boss. He wanted to be the miracle she thought he was.
When the doctors returned to room 402 to pull the plug, they didn't find a corpse. They found a miracle. Angel Gabriel was sitting up, his dark eyes burning with a cold, sharp focus that hadn't been there for years. The news of his awakening hit the hospital like a lightning bolt, and within hours, the wolves in the hallway had vanished back into the shadows. But Angel didn't care about his rivals yet. As soon as he could hold a phone, he called Marco. His voice was a low growl that made the lieutenant tremble through the speaker. "I'm back," Angel said, "but things are changing. I need a list of every specialist in the country who treats childhood leukemia, and I need it in 10 minutes. Over the next week, Angel began to reclaim his empire with a terrifying, quiet efficiency. He didn't use bullets this time. He used information. He clawed back his territory and his bank accounts, but he did it all from his hospital bed. However, his real work was happening in secret. He hired private investigators to look into Zainab's life. He learned about the war in Syria, the loss of her parents, and the brave woman, a distant aunt who Zainab called Mom, who had spent every penny to keep the little girl alive. He looked at the bills Zainab's mother couldn't pay and the expensive treatments the hospital had denied. "Fix it," Angel ordered Marco, "but she can never know it was me. If she knows I'm a man with blood on my hands, she won't take the help. Tell the hospital an anonymous foundation has chosen her for a full scholarship." Suddenly, Zainab's world changed. A team of world-class doctors arrived in her room. They moved her to a private suite filled with sunlight and new toys. They brought medicines that didn't even have names yet, only promise. When her mother asked how they could afford this, the hospital board simply smiled and said a silent guardian had taken care of everything. Whenever Zainab visited Angel, he hid his phone and his ledgers. He went back to being the Mr. Angel she knew. He watched her skin turn from gray back to a healthy glow, and he felt a strange new warmth in his chest. "The doctors gave me the magic medicine," Zainab cheered one afternoon, spinning around in her new pink slippers. "I told you the angels were listening." Angel looked at his tattooed hands, hands that had done many bad things. He tucked them under the white sheets so she wouldn't see the scars. "Maybe they were, kid," he said softly. He was still the most dangerous man in the city, but he had found a new reason to fight. He wasn't building an empire of fear anymore. He was building a fortress of protection around a little girl who thought he was a hero. He knew that if she ever found out the truth about who he really was, he might lose the only light he had left. For the first time in his life, the devil was praying to stay hidden. The hospital hallways were buzzing with whispers. Now that Ángel was fully awake and recovering, the air of mystery around room 402 had turned into an air of danger. Zainab, feeling stronger thanks to the magic medicine, was skipping down the hall to surprise her friend with a drawing of a sun when she saw two men standing outside his door. They weren't doctors. They wore sharp, dark suits and had cold eyes that reminded her of the soldiers back in her home country. Zainab stopped behind a large rolling cart, her heart thumping. "The boss is getting soft," one man hissed. "He's spending millions on some kid in the pediatric wing, while Torino is taking over the docks. People are saying Ángel Gabriel has lost his edge. They're calling him the devil for a reason, and he needs to start acting like it before we all end up in the ground." Zainab's hand moved to her mouth. The boss? The devil? She looked down at her drawing of the happy sun. Her legs felt heavy as she walked slowly toward the door. The men moved aside, glancing at her with confusion, but she didn't look at them. She pushed the door open. Ángel was sitting up, staring at a laptop screen. When he saw her, he quickly closed it and tried to smile, but he saw the look on her face. The joy was gone from her eyes. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice small and trembling. Ángel felt a cold pit in his stomach. "Is what true, Zainab?" "Those men outside, they called you a bad name. They called you the devil. They said you did scary things." Zainab walked to the edge of the bed, holding her drawing like a shield. "Are you one of the bad men, Mr. Angel? Did you hurt people?" The silence in the room was louder than the machines. Ángel looked at his hands. He could have lied. He could have told her they were mistaken. But looking into her clear, honest eyes, he knew he couldn't. This little girl had saved his life. He owed her the truth. "I have done many things I am not proud of, Zainab," he said, his voice thick. "I lived in a world where you had to be scary to survive. I was a man who chose anger over everything else." A tear rolled down Zainab's cheek. "So you are a monster?" Ángel leaned forward, his heart aching more than his bullet wounds ever had. "I was, but when I was lost in the dark, I heard a voice, your voice. You didn't see a monster, you saw a man who was lonely. You gave me a lucky stone when everyone else gave me a grave." He reached out, but stopped, waiting to see if she would pull away. She didn't. He gently took her hand. "I can't change what I was, but I can choose what I am now. And right now, I am the man who will make sure no monster ever gets near you again. That is my promise." Zainab looked at him for a long time. She saw the scars on his arms, but she also saw the sadness in his eyes. She slowly placed her drawing on his lap. "The sun is for you," she whispered, "because you were in the dark for a long time." Ángel gripped the paper, his knuckles white. He had reclaimed his empire, but he realized that keeping the trust of this one small child was the hardest battle he would ever fight. The peace in the hospital was shattered as soon as the sun went down. Vincent Torino had spent years waiting for Ángel Gabriel to die, and finding out he was awake and protecting a child made him see an opportunity. To a man like Torino, a heart was just a target. He realized that the devil of the docks finally had a weakness, and that weakness wore a dusty pink dress. In his dark office across town, Torino pointed to a grainy photo of Zainab on a security monitor. "The girl is the key," he growled to his men. "If we have her, Ángel will hand over the keys to the city just to keep her breathing. Get her tonight." Back at St. Jude's, the hallways were quiet. Zainab was tucked into her bed in the pediatric wing, finally sleeping deeply thanks to the new medicine. Her lucky stone sat on the nightstand next to her. Suddenly, the door creaked open. It wasn't the soft-footed nurse she expected. 3 men in heavy coats slipped into the room, their shadows stretching across the bright wallpaper. "Wake up, kid," one of them hissed, reaching for her. Zainab's eyes snapped open. She saw the cold metal of a weapon tucked into a belt and the mean look in the man's eyes. She tried to scream, but a heavy hand clamped over her mouth. "Don't make a sound," the man warned. They began to unhook her monitors, the machines letting out a sharp, panicked chirp as they were disconnected. They didn't realize that Ángel Gabriel had been watching. Even though he was still recovering, he had connected his laptop to the hospital's security cameras. The moment he saw the men enter the pediatric wing, the devil returned in full force. He didn't wait for his guards. He ripped the IV line from his own arm, ignored the stinging pain in his side, and threw on a dark jacket over his hospital gown. The kidnappers were dragging Zainab toward the service elevator when the doors slid open. There stood Ángel. He looked pale and haggard, but his eyes were like frozen steel. He wasn't the sleeping man anymore. "Put her down," Ángel said. His voice was so low it sounded like grinding stones. "You're in no shape to fight, Gabriel," the lead man laughed, raising his gun. He never got the chance to pull the trigger. With a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man who was dead a week ago, Ángel lunged. He was a whirlwind of fury.
He didn't fight like a soldier, he fought like a father protecting his only light. He disarmed the first man with a sickening crack and used his strength to hurl the second against the tiled wall. The third man, seeing his friends crumble, dropped Zainab and ran for the stairs. Zainab scrambled into the corner, shaking and crying. Ángel didn't chase the runner. He dropped to his knees, his own stitches pulling apart and staining his gown red, and pulled Zainab into his arms. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. "I've got you, little one. The monsters are gone." Zainab clung to his neck, her small hands gripping his jacket. She realized then that being a bad man was about who you hurt, but being a good man was about who you were willing to die for. The wolves had come for the angel, but they had forgotten that even an angel has a sword.
The hospital was no longer safe, but Ángel Gabriel's world was. The morning after the attack, Ángel didn't return to his private suite. Instead, he moved Zainab and her mother to a heavily guarded estate on the coast, far away from the city's gray concrete and the whispers of the docks. For the first time in his life, Ángel wasn't waking up to check the stock market or news of his rivals. He was waking up to the sound of Zainab's laughter echoing through the hallways. While she continued her recovery with the best private doctors money could buy, Ángel stayed by her side. He traded his sharp suits for soft sweaters, and the hand that once held a weapon now carefully held a book of fairy tales. "Are you going back to being the boss soon?" Zainab asked one afternoon. They were sitting on a wide porch overlooking the ocean. Zainab's color was fully back, her cheeks a healthy pink, and her hair starting to grow back in soft, fuzzy curls. Ángel looked out at the water. "No, little one," he said, and for the first time he really meant it. "I've spent 30 years building walls to keep people out. I think I'd rather build something that lets people in." He explained to her, in a way a child could understand, that he was leaving his old life behind. He was selling his businesses and giving his throne to Marco, with one condition: the violence had to stop. He didn't want to be a king anymore. He just wanted to be a guardian. Their bond grew into something that went beyond just a man and a child he saved. Zainab taught him how to plant marigolds in the garden, and he taught her how to be brave when the doctors came for her checkups. He learned that her favorite color wasn't just pink, but sunset pink, and she learned that underneath his scary tattoos, he had a heart that beat just for her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Zainab fell asleep with her head on his lap. Her lucky stone was tucked into his pocket. Ángel looked down at her and realized that he hadn't just survived a shooting or a coma. He had survived a life of coldness. He reached for his phone and sent a final message to his associates: "I am out. Do not look for me." He realized that he didn't need an empire to be powerful. He had everything he needed right here. The devil was gone, replaced by a man who finally understood that the greatest strength wasn't making people fear you, it was making a child feel safe. They were a new kind of family, built not from blood, but from a whisper in the dark that had changed everything. 1 year later, the name Ángel Gabriel had vanished from the police reports and the headlines of the underground. To the world he left behind, he was a ghost. But in the sunlight of a quiet coastal town, he had never felt more alive. He had finished the long, difficult process of selling every business he owned, ensuring that the money was clean and that his exit from the criminal world was absolute. With that fortune, he didn't buy more mansions or fast cars. Instead, he opened the doors to the Zainab Foundation. It was a place designed for children who, like Zainab were lost in the system, refugees with no voice and no hope for the medical care they needed. The foundation didn't just pay for surgeries, it provided a safe harbor. The biggest change, however, was in a small courtroom. There were no cameras or reporters, just a judge, a social worker, and a little girl in a bright yellow dress. When the judge signed the final papers, Zainab didn't just have a guardian anymore, she had a father. For the first time, her legal name matched the man who had stood by her through every treatment and every nightmare. "Is it official now?" Zainab asked as they walked out into the spring air, clutching a framed certificate. "It's official," Ángel replied, a genuine smile softening his rugged face. "From now on, we're a team, forever." To celebrate, they returned home to the spot in the backyard they had picked out weeks before. The soil was rich and dark, a stark contrast to the cold, gray hospital floors where they had first met. Together, they knelt in the dirt. Angel's large, tattooed hands worked alongside Zainab's small ones, carefully placing seeds into the earth. "Last year, I was scared of everything," Zainab said, patting the dirt down around a tiny sprout. "I thought the world was just a place where things get broken. But you woke up, and then everything started growing again." Ángel looked at the garden they were building. He realized that his life had been a circle that finally closed. He had started as a boy witnessing death in a rainy alley, but he was ending as a man nurturing life in the sun. He understood now that true strength wasn't about how many people feared his name. It was about the fact that he was the person Zainab ran to when she was happy. As they finished planting, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The devil had been buried a long time ago, and in his place, a father stood. They had built a little piece of heaven out of the wreckage of their pasts, proving that no soul is ever truly lost as long as there is someone willing to listen to a whisper in the dark.